The applause in the high school auditorium was like static in my ears, every clap hitting a little too hard as I sat there with my scholarship application packet in my lap. I was half listening to the principal welcome parents and students when I caught a sharp whisper just a few feet away. "Tell her stepmother the college account is already empty," the PTA treasurer said to Mrs. O'Malley, my history teacher. Empty. I thought I'd misheard, but the look on Mrs. O'Malley's face, that tight little blink like she'd been pulled into something she didn't want, told me I hadn't. She glanced toward me, then away too fast. My stomach clenched, heat flooding my cheeks. That account wasn't just some bank balance. It was my dad's promise. I was 14 when he died, but the one thing he made sure of before surgeries and chemo swallowed him was that I'd have the money for college. His will spelled it out, locked in a fund with 2 trustees, my stepmother, Denise, and his sister in Oregon, so I could focus on my future, not debt. And yet here I was, my palms sweating against the scholarship forms, suddenly wondering if my safe landing had been sawed out from under me without anyone telling me. It was like the words were bouncing around in my head, louder than the speeches. Empty. 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 I turned, scanning for Denise in the crowd. She was at the back, standing with the other PTA officers, hair perfectly smoothed, cardigan draped just so. She laughed at something another mom said, one hand resting casually on the check-in table, as if she didn't have the capacity for destruction sitting in her signature. I swallowed hard. This wasn't the place to make a scene. Not surrounded by teachers, other students, and parents who'd instantly take her side if I blurted out accusations. She was everybody's warm, organizing, almost too perfect Denise. Still, I couldn't just sit there as if the words hadn't hit me like a punch. I leaned forward, clutching my backpack so tightly my knuckles hurt. If what I heard was true, everything about my next year, about leaving this town, about the whole life I envisioned, was about to twist into something I couldn't control. The clapping died down as they moved to the next part of the program, but I wasn't hearing any of it anymore. I was watching her, watching the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes when she caught mine for a second, before looking away. I needed to know if that whisper was a misunderstanding, gossip, or the truth. And the thought that Denise might have been quietly digging into my future while standing in the same room, week after week, made my chest ache in a way that felt almost audible. But if I was going to find out, I had to be careful. Because Denise didn't lash out directly. She prided herself on knowing how to make me look like the difficult one. And something in her face tonight told me she'd use that trick again. The question was, how do you confront someone who's smiling at the whole town while maybe gutting you from the inside? Shall I write the next chapter? After the ceremony, I walked out of the auditorium with my scholarship packet hanging loose in my hand, every step heavy with the echo of that single word, empty. I'd planned to walk home with friends, maybe grab milkshakes to celebrate, but all I could think about was getting behind my own closed door and trying to breathe without the knot in my stomach tightening further. But home wasn't really home anymore. Since Dad's funeral, it had been more like a territory I rented from Denise's generosity. As she liked to remind me in little sideways comments, I could have sold this place, you know, but I'm letting you finish school here. The truth was, she couldn't sell it without breaking the terms of Dad's will, but she said it often enough that I sometimes caught myself wondering if she'd find a way. When we moved in together after Dad's passing, she promised 2 things. 1, she'd never touch the college fund. 2, she'd keep the family house until I graduated. That was 3 years ago, and for a while I believed her. She made the monthly trustee reports look official, even explained them over dinner, always with a sugary calm that could turn sharp if I asked too many questions. Part of me wanted to just log into the account and check, but the trust was set up so I couldn't. Only the trustees could access the details, which meant asking Denise directly, or going over her head to my aunt in Oregon, which felt like burning a bridge I might need later. I stepped inside the house, the faint scent of Denise's vanilla candles already curling through the hallway. She was in the kitchen, tidying up what looked like a stack of PTA donation forms. She glanced up, smiled like nothing was wrong. "How was scholarship night?" she asked, her voice bright. I shrugged, tossing my bag onto the couch. It was fine. I almost asked right then. Almost. But the way she moved, slow and deliberate, tucking a form under the pile with her perfectly manicured fingers, made me hesitate. If she had touched the account, she'd never admit it without me having something solid. And going in blind would give her too much room to spin the story before I could even shape my side. The stakes weren't just money. If the fund really was gone, my chance to get out of this house, out of her control, might be gone too. And if I couldn't get out, I'd be finishing school under the same roof as the person who might have stolen my escape plan. I told myself I'd wait one more day before making a move, just enough to find some trail, some slip-up. But deep down, I already knew waiting meant she'd have more time to bury whatever she'd done. And it turned out, Denise didn't bury things in files or folders. She buried them in plain sight, under layers of charm and control that made even me forget how dangerous she could be. If only the first cracks didn't start showing in such small, almost invisible ways. The kinds of things other people might think were nothing. Shall I write the next chapter? The first crack came the very next morning. I'd signed up weeks ago to run the bake sale table at the school fair, something that would have gotten me FaceTime with the local business sponsors, the same ones who funded a few of our biggest scholarships. I'd counted on it. But when I checked the posted volunteer schedule in the office hallway, my name was nowhere. In my spot was Shannon W., one of Denise's PTA friends, whose kids spent more time skipping class than in it. "Ms. Klein," I called to the secretary, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm supposed to be at the bake sale Friday." She glanced at me over her glasses. "Oh, Denise called yesterday to say you couldn't make it, that you'd be too busy with remedial prep sessions." Her voice dipped, apologetic but final. Remedial. The word stung more than it should have. Any teacher who heard it would picture low grades, panic studying, exactly the opposite of the image I needed before applications went in. I muttered something about checking my schedule and walked out before my face gave me away. I didn't even have to imagine how Denise had said it. That lilting concern she used when hinting to people that I wasn't as competent as I thought I was. That afternoon, I got a text from the school secretary herself. "Don't forget permission slip for next week's trip. Denise said she'd sign it and drop it off." My stomach turned. She hadn't asked me if there even was a trip. She just wanted her handwriting somewhere official, like leaving fingerprints to indicate she was the adult in charge. None of this was technically illegal, but it was her way of tightening the net, making the school see her as the decision-maker and me as the dependent, who could barely manage her own commitments. That night at dinner, she leaned back in her chair with a smug little look and said, "I saw you checking the list this morning. I thought it'd be less stressful for you to focus on your grades. You'll thank me when you're not burning out." I wanted to tell her I didn't need her help, that I saw exactly what she was doing. But the truth was, I wasn't ready to show my hand yet. I was still looking for the real reason the PTA treasurer might have said empty. Unfortunately, that reason wasn't going to sit quietly in the shadows for long. The next time I pushed back even slightly, Denise would twist the whole thing into another performance about my attitude. And that performance would leave me grasping for oxygen in a room full of people who clapped for her every move. And that moment came faster than I could have imagined. All it took was one alert on my phone to knock the ground out from under me completely. Shall I write the next chapter? It happened on a Wednesday afternoon while I was in the library finishing up an essay draft. My phone buzzed with a notification, not from social media, but from the mobile banking app I kept purely to track the checking account tied to my part-time job. Bank alert. Balance change. Linked education account withdrawal, $2,500. For a second, I thought I'd read it wrong. That account wasn't mine. It was linked. I could only see it, because a year ago, Denise had once accidentally merged the alerts to my online banking when paying a bill on my laptop. I'd kept quiet, figuring someday that glitch might be useful. I never expected it to scream at me in the middle of the library. I stared at the screen, willing it to be a mistake. Under description, it said only, "Transfer authorized. Trustee Ferber 1. Trustee Ferber 1. That was Denise. My hands went cold as a stone, and I had to lock my phone so my shaking didn't register as tapping random apps. All I could think about was how $2,500 was about the cost of a semester's worth of books. Maybe more if prices went up. And that was gone in a heartbeat. I packed my things without even pretending to keep studying. On the walk home, I kept rehearsing what I might say, but every version ended with her making a pitying face and telling some story about temporary borrowing that she'd already floated to anyone important enough to influence my future. When I walked in, she was in the living room scrolling through her tablet, feet tucked neatly under her like some serene picture of domestic stability. "I got a bank alert," I said, cutting straight in. She looked up, eyebrows lifting just slightly, that controlled reaction that told me she'd already prepared an answer. "Oh? Probably a glitch. Those alerts go haywire all the time. Don't worry about it." She even chuckled. "It said you authorized a transfer from the college account," I pressed, my voice taut. She set the tablet down slowly, like she was trying not to spook me. "Sweetheart, please. I'd never touch that money in a way that would hurt you. But I have been covering extra expenses lately. Household things. You benefit from that too, you know. So you did use it." Her mouth curved into something between a smile and a warning. "Don't twist my words. You're young, and you don't understand how finances work. I'm protecting our stability." When I didn't respond, she sighed, tilting her head with exaggerated patience. "And, honestly, the way you obsess over that fund is starting to look a little entitled. College isn't the only path, you know." It was the perfect blend of gaslighting and image control. She'd painted me as spoiled in less than a minute. If I pushed harder, she'd spin the story so by tomorrow, half the PTA would think I'd yelled at her for buying groceries. I left the room before my voice could crack, retreating to mine and locking the door. My heart was hammering in my ears. I'd just been handed a glimpse, a proof-shaped shadow. But shadows weren't enough in Denise's world. I needed hard evidence she couldn't explain away, and I had no idea that it would be a public humiliation, not a private slip, that would give me my first real opening. Shall I write the next chapter? It happened in the middle of parent-teacher conference night. The hallway outside my chemistry classroom was packed with parents holding little paper appointment slips, the air thick with coffee breath, cologne, and the faint scent of janitor's bleach. I was sitting at one of the metal chairs by the lockers, waiting for my turn to walk my guidance counselor through the last of my scholarship forms. I hadn't expected Denise to even show up. She usually skipped these unless she could turn them into a photo op. But then I heard her laugh. That performative, slightly too high trill she used when she knew there was an audience. And there she was at the end of the corridor, shaking hands with my counselor like they were old friends. I watched the scene unfold in slow motion. My counselor, Mrs. Alvarez, leaned in to say something about exciting college prospects, and that's when Denise's voice rose just enough for the parents around her to hear. "College isn't for everyone," she said breezily, cutting off whatever praise Mrs. Alvarez had been offering. "Some kids are better off learning practical skills instead of wasting years and money. The words landed like a slap I didn't see coming. My counselor's face flickered in confusion, clearly unsure how to reply without insulting a parent. The dad standing behind them glanced at me, eyebrows raised, and I wanted to sink through the floor. It wasn't just the words. It was the implication. This was Denise's way of planting doubt in the mind of someone who held direct influence over my letters of recommendation, making sure that even if I got to college, there'd be whispers about whether I really deserved it. I forced myself to walk over, my pulse hammering, and stood quietly until she noticed me. The surprise on her face lasted less than a second before morphing into a pleasant smile, as if the little verbal grenade she'd just tossed hadn't exploded at all. "Oh, sweetheart, I was just telling Mrs. Alvarez how talented you are in your own way," she said, punctuating it with a pat on my arm, like I was a child showing off crayon drawings. I smiled tightly, my frozen, teeth-clenched smile, aware of how many sets of eyes were on us. Denise thrived here, in the element of witnesses she could manipulate. But I could feel something tipping inside me, a sense that I was done playing soft. For the rest of the conference, I barely spoke, holding myself back from calling her out in front of everyone. I told myself I'd take my swing when I had the kind of proof that couldn't be laughed off or reframed as youthful overreaction. So that night, while she was still basking in her performance and I was stewing in silence, I made a plan: get access to the paper trail. If she'd really withdrawn from the fund, there'd be records. And if she'd covered her tracks, maybe, just maybe, she'd slip somewhere else. I started making calls the next afternoon. But what I found out from the bank didn't just close the door on the easy fix. It slammed it in my face and bolted it shut. "Shall I write the next chapter?" The woman at the bank sounded polite, bored, and about as helpful as a locked vault door. I'd slipped into the branch on my lunch break, clutching my student ID and the trust's account number I'd memorized years ago. I spared her any long stories, just said I needed to place a temporary freeze, because there had been unauthorized withdrawals. She tapped at her keyboard, her nails clicking like tiny metronomes. Then she looked up with a practiced smile. "I'm afraid that's not something we can do without the approval of the primary trustee," she said. "The primary trustee, meaning Denise," I confirmed, keeping my voice even. "Yes, and she has to request it directly," the banker replied, her tone carefully neutral. But that neutral tone carried an edge, a faint, knowing distaste, like she'd already heard some version of Denise's story. "She's told us the account is being handled appropriately. Is there a specific transaction you're concerned about?" And there it was. Denise had gotten to them first. She'd already set the narrative, maybe painting me as an anxious teen who didn't understand how trusts work, the same way she'd gaslit me at home. I told the banker I'd follow up another time, walked out into the bright sunlight, and stood there blinking like the wrong brightness setting had been turned up on my world. My easy fix, freezing the account, was gone. As I walked back to school, my phone buzzed with another message from the PTA group chat Denise had sneakily added me to last month. Reminder: Denise will be collecting raffle ticket money after Thursday's meeting. I almost laughed. Of course, always around other people's money, always the one trusted to organize things. And, somehow, she used that to keep her image spotless, even when I was seeing the cracks. That night, I sat at my desk, scrolling through screenshots I'd quietly saved over the past year. Little things, like meetings she said she'd skipped showing up in photos, petty contradictions she'd texted me about school finances. Still, nothing would prove a direct theft. I needed something undeniable, something in her own words, or with her signature on it. But Denise didn't make mistakes like that, at least not intentionally. What I didn't know then was that the paper proof I was hunting would land in my hands entirely by accident, printed on the wrong machine, on the wrong day when I least expected it. And when I read it, all I could think was, she's not even ashamed. Shall I write the next chapter? It happened 2 days later, during after-school hours when the hallways were half empty, and the fluorescent lights hummed just loud enough to make you notice. I was in the PTA storeroom, a repurposed supply closet lined with boxes of raffle tickets, stacks of flyers, and the faint, sweet-sour scent of stale coffee. Mrs. Marsh, the PTA treasurer, had asked me to drop off some printed programs for Friday's bake sale. The PTA's old printer sat in the corner, an ancient beast that often jammed, leaving half-print jobs hanging out like a tongue. I bent down to add my flyers to the stack when I noticed a few fresh pages sitting in the output tray, face down. Out of habit more than curiosity, I picked them up. The first line made my heart stop. Subject: Fund loan approval. From Denise K. Redacted email. 2. Client services, Harborway Trust. The email was quick, casual. That was the first blow. Like this wasn't even something worth dressing up in fake formality. She'd written, as the primary trustee for my full name's education account, I approve the withdrawal of $4,800 to cover personal expenses. This is a temporary loan. I'll replace the funds as soon as our family trip is paid off. Consider this a vacation before tuition, if you like. Vacation before tuition. I read that line 3 times, my hands getting clammy enough to smudge the toner. This wasn't supposition, or a misunderstanding, or a bank glitch. It was an admission, in her own words, that she had raided my trust for a cruise. Of all things. I flipped through the other 2 pages. One was an auto-reply from the trust acknowledging receipt of her request. The other was an itinerary for a Caribbean trip for 4. Her 2 biological kids, and a +1. My name was nowhere. By the time I slid the papers into my binder, I could hear my blood pounding in my ears. If she came in right now and saw me holding them, she'd spin it, maybe even destroy the pages before I could snap photos. So I kept my head down, pretending to fiddle with the flyers until I was alone again. The weight of those papers in my bag felt heavier than my textbooks. For the first time, I wasn't chasing shadows. I was holding something Denise couldn't deny, couldn't twist into a story about groceries or household needs. But proof alone wasn't enough. In Denise's world, she could make anyone look like a petty, ungrateful kid if I came at her solo. I needed someone with power over her, someone she couldn't charm or intimidate into siding with her. That's when I remembered. My dad's sister in Oregon, the other trustee. Quiet, sharp-eyed, and the kind of person who collected receipts like other people collected refrigerator magnets. I hadn't spoken to her in almost a year. But now, she was my only shot, and calling her was going to blow this whole thing wide open, in ways I couldn't yet imagine. Shall I write the next chapter? I sat on the edge of my bed that night with my phone in my lap, staring at Aunt Claire's number like it might bite me if I touched it. The last time we'd spoken, it was about my grades and whether I needed help with SAT prep. She'd sent me a care package of homemade granola and used books, then faded back into her life on the other side of the country. Part of me worried she'd think I was only calling for money, but this wasn't about asking for help. It was about forcing her to see what Denise was doing. I took a deep breath and hit the call button. The line clicked after the 3rd ring. "Hey, kiddo, is everything okay?" Her voice had that steady, low warmth I'd almost forgotten I missed. I think Denise has been taking money from the college fund," I blurted. There was a pause, not long, but weighted. "What makes you think that?" I told her about the bank alert. Then the email printout. I read her the vacation before tuition line word for word, my voice shaking as I said it out loud for the first time. By the end, I heard her breathe in slow through her nose. "Do you still have that paperwork?" "Yes, all of it." Good. Don't confront her yet. Forward me pictures of everything. I'll handle the trust side. Her tone had shifted. No more warmth, just that cool brick wall way she had when she meant business. And I'll be in town by Friday. Something tightened in my chest, a mix of relief and dread. You're coming here? She's counting on you being a teenager she can talk down to, Aunt Claire said flatly. Let her try that with me. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, the glow of my phone little more than a pulse in my palm. I knew once Aunt Claire landed here, the game would change. Denise would sense the shift instantly. Still, I kept picturing the look on her face when she realized she wasn't the only one who could play the trust card. But then another thought crept in. What if Aunt Claire coming here made Denise escalate? She'd never forgive me for going behind her back. And if she felt cornered, she might lash out in ways I wasn't ready for. By Thursday night, the tension in the house was suffocating, like waiting for a storm that hadn't shown up yet, but you could feel in your bones. I caught Denise looking at me a few times too long. Her smile stretched just enough to let me know she suspected something. And then, Friday afternoon, in the school library with Aunt Claire sitting across from me and the damning pages on the table between us, Denise walked in, eyes sharp, posture poised, and I knew the storm had just arrived. Shall I write the next chapter? The moment she walked through the library doors, the air in the room seemed to shift. Heavier, tighter. Aunt Claire was in her blazer, hair pulled back, papers fanned neatly in front of her, like she'd been expecting a deposition, not a chat. I sat between them at the long wooden table, my pulse so loud I barely heard Denise's heels on the floor. Claire, Denise said smoothly, but her eyes darted to me. What's going on here? A trustee meeting, Aunt Claire replied, her voice like polished steel. You've been making withdrawals without the required secondary approval. Care to explain? Denise's warmth evaporated in an instant, her smile still there, but it was the brittle version I'd seen when she was caught in a lie. It was a temporary loan, for family needs, completely within my rights. Family needs. Claire slid the email printout across the table, tapping the line I'd memorized. Vacation before tuition. Are you under the impression a Caribbean cruise is an educational expense? Her tone didn't rise, but it cut. Denise picked up the papers, glanced over them, and then set them down with manufactured calm. You can twist my words however you want, but the fact is, that trip was part of keeping our household together. Morale matters, especially when the household, you mean, excludes the beneficiary named in the trust? Claire's interruption was like a door slamming shut. 4 tickets, 2 of your children, 1 + 1, and not a single cent for my name's tuition needs. For a second, I thought Denise might actually snap. Her jaw tightened, and she looked at me with that cold glint I'd learned to recognize as her deciding whether to humiliate me now or later. Then she leaned back and dropped the veneer altogether. This is my home. I've raised her these last few years. I've put clothes on her back and food on the table, and I won't be treated like I'm some kind of thief over a little money I already intend to replace. Claire didn't blink. You'll replace it by Monday. In writing, notarized, with proof of transfer back to the account, or I will proceed with legal removal of your trusteeship. The silence after that was almost unbearable. Denise looked between us, her control slipping, her PTA president mask useless here. And for the first time, I saw something under it. Not guilt, not even fear, just calculation, the kind that smelled like she was already figuring out how to make me pay for siding with Claire. But she gathered the papers and said, Fine, each letter bitten off like it hurt to spit them out. You'll have it. She turned, her heels clicking sharp against the laminate floor as she walked out without another word. I should have felt triumphant, But all I felt was the tightening certainty that this wasn't over. If Denise had to give the money back, she'd find another way to hurt me, and the fallout wouldn't stay inside the walls of our house. And sure enough, by the end of the weekend, the whispers had started, and the ground under my feet was about to tilt all over again. Shall I write the next chapter? By Sunday evening, I knew she'd started her counterattack. It began with the little sideways glances in the grocery store, women from the PTA shifting their gaze from me to their carts like they'd just remembered they had somewhere else to be. One mom I'd known since middle school barely nodded when I said hello. By Monday morning, the whispers had made their way to the school hallways. I caught fragments as I walked past. Ungrateful. After everything she's done for her, boarding school might be better. At first I thought it was just gossip reaching my age group late. But when I got a text from Mrs. Marsh, the PTA treasurer, it was clear this was orchestrated. Heard about the trust fund drama, she wrote? Sorry it came to that. Denise says you've been under a lot of stress and maybe lashing out. Hope you're okay. Lashing out. Denise's favorite shorthand for don't believe her side of the story. I could picture her in the PTA meeting, sighing heavily, eyes damp, spinning it into a tale where she was the misunderstood caretaker who'd made one tiny financial decision out of love. But her social circle wasn't her only weapon. That same afternoon, I got an email from our guidance office. Due to updated parental guidelines, your college recommendation process will now require joint consultation with your primary guardian. Primary guardian, Denise. It hit me like a body check. She'd gone straight to the school to ensure she still had control over my future, even after being caught. That night, I sat in my room feeling the walls close in. Aunt Claire had forced her to replace the money, and she had, I confirmed it in the trust account online. But in her mind, repayment was nothing. Reputation and control were the real currency, and she was already buying both back at my expense. Claire called to check in. She won't let this go quietly, she warned. I could hear the muted sound of airport announcements. She was already on her way home. Do you want me to stay involved? I looked at the stack of papers, the email printouts, the cruise itinerary now neatly filed in a Ziploc on my desk. I had won the battle for the money. The bigger war was my independence. I think I need to finish this myself, I told her. And as soon as I said it, I knew the plan forming in my mind wasn't just about surviving Denise until graduation. It was about making sure she never had this kind of power over me again. The first step? Getting out from under her roof before she found another way to chain me there. Shall I write the next chapter? I started small, collecting dorm applications, touring campus housing websites like I was researching for fun. In reality, the moment I saw my acceptance letters coming in, I was going to turn them into my ticket out. But Denise could sniff change in the air like a bloodhound. By Wednesday, she was lingering in my doorway after school, leaning against the frame with a mug of tea. I talked to Mrs. Alvarez, she said casually, eyes flicking to my laptop screen. She tells me you're charging ahead on college plans. I hope you're factoring in the reality that living away from home is expensive. I am, I said, not looking up. She took a slow sip. Good, because technically that trust only covers tuition and fees. Housing, well, you might need to get creative. There was that tiny smirk, the kind of smile meant to plant a seed of fear. It was a reminder. She could still make my life hell without touching the tuition fund directly. Housing deposits, meal plans, even transportation, all were potential choke points she could threaten or withhold. I knew then I had to move faster. That night, I called a campus housing office and asked about early deposit dorm programs for incoming freshmen. They told me there were a few slots left, refundable only to the student, not the guardian. My heart raced. This was my shot. Of course, the deposit was $500, and my part-time job at the bookstore barely covered my phone bill and gas. I dug into the envelope of cash I'd been stashing, birthday bills and tips I'd never banked, so Denise couldn't see them. I had just enough. Following the instructions, I mailed the check directly to the housing office the next morning between classes. It felt like tucking a lifeboat into the water, quiet and unseen. The same afternoon, the confirmation email hit my inbox. I read it twice, then forwarded it to Aunt Claire with one line. Step 1, done. Her reply came fast. Proud of you. Don't let her sniff it out. But Denise didn't need to see an email. The change in my mood must have tipped her off, because by Friday evening she confronted me in the kitchen. So, she said, her voice deceptively light, anything you want to tell me about deposits? I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. I had no idea how she knew, whether it was a guess or something more. The pause was enough for her to tilt her head, eyes narrowing. Shame to make plans behind the person who's been putting a roof over your head all this time, she added. Makes people wonder who you really are. She wanted me rattled, to second-guess the safety of my plan. But I kept chewing, kept my face as unreadable as I could. Inside, my pulse was a drum roll, because if she did find out about my next move, she'd do more than plant rumors. She'd try to tear the whole escape down before it ever left the ground. Shall I write the next chapter?